The heat over Fort Claymore's rifle range had a weight to it, a dense shimmer that made the air dance above the baked concrete and packed dirt. The sound of gunfire was steady, rhythmic, echoing off the surrounding berms. The smell of burnt powder clung to everything. The benches, the target frames, even the metal trash cans lined along the firing line. Private Julia Bennett had been sweeping brass since 7 a.m. The broom was a heavy industrial type, its handle worn smooth by years of use, and the gloves on her hands were stiff from weeks of exposure to dirt, sand, and spent casings. She'd learned early that the range was both a place of discipline and hierarchy. Everyone had their lane, and hers was behind the firing line, not on it. She moved slowly down the row, sweeping the gleaming shell casings into neat piles. Each metallic clink of brass against brass was swallowed by the louder crack of rifles firing downrange. At the far end, a small group of soldiers clustered around one bench. Even without looking up, Julia knew who was at the center. Staff Sergeant Mark Keating, the base's top marksman, known for being as precise with his words as with his shots. Keating was demonstrating with his M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, a weapon that seemed like an extension of him. Every movement he made was deliberate, shouldering the rifle, adjusting the bipod, dialing the scope. His voice carried just enough for the group to hear, giving short lessons on wind drift and reading the mirage. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe that heroes come in the most unexpected forms, don't forget to subscribe. Julia kept her eyes down, but her ears were trained on every word. Years before she joined the Army, she had spent Saturdays with her father on civilian ranges. Richard Bennett had been a competitive long-range shooter before a work accident left him with a permanent limp. By age 11, Julia could name every part of a rifle, and by 16, she could read wind calls like she was reading a map. But she didn't talk about that here. This wasn't her world, not officially. She was just the private assigned to range maintenance. Keating's rifle barked, and a faint metallic clang answered from 600 yards away. The spotter called, "Impact, center mass." Keating adjusted the windage slightly, fired again, another perfect hit. Julia's eyes flicked to the range flags, then to the shimmering heat above the dirt beyond the targets. The mirage bent slightly more than it had a moment ago. Almost without realizing, she murmured, "Quarter minute left." Corporal Harris, leaning nearby, turned. "What was that, Private?" Julia straightened. "Nothing, Corporal. Just thinking out loud." Harris smirked. "She's calling wind now." He raised his voice. "Hey, Sergeant, the Broom girl's got an opinion." Keating glanced over, expression unreadable. "That's so, Bennett?" She hesitated. "I just noticed the mirage shift. Looked like a quarter minute." Keating held her gaze for a moment, then made the adjustment she'd mentioned. He fired. Another clean hit. The group chuckled, Harris shaking his head. "Lucky guess." Julia went back to sweeping, cheeks hot. She told herself to keep quiet. Finish the brass. Don't get noticed. By late morning, the sun was punishing, and the air shimmered in visible waves. Keating was still running the demonstration when something went wrong. His next shot landed low and right. He adjusted, fired again, and it landed low. "Scope's off," the spotter said. "Could be the mounts." Keating frowned. "We'll get it checked later. No point burning ammo if it's not tracking." From the side, Harris grinned. "Hey, maybe Bennett should take a shot. She's already playing spotter from the Broom line." There was a ripple of laughter, but Keating didn't smile. "You shoot, Private." Julia hesitated. "A little, Sergeant." "How little?" "Some matches, civilian side." Keating studied her. "Ever shoot past 500? "Yes, Sergeant." He nodded to the spotter. "Hand her the rifle?" The weight of the M2010 was heavier than her father's F-class rig, but balanced perfectly. Julia eased into the prone position, adjusted the bipod, and snugged the stock into her shoulder. She checked the chamber, the scope's parallax, and the elevation turret. "Target 600 yards steel, left silhouette," Keating said. "Wind's variable at 8. Mirage is dancing. Show me what you've got." Julia dialed elevation for 600, then made a half-minute left wind correction. She inhaled, exhaled halfway, held her breath. The crosshairs steadied. The trigger press was slow and deliberate. Crack! A faint clang drifted back from the distance. "Impact," the spotter confirmed. Julia ran the bolt, adjusted slightly for a stronger gust, and fired again. Another clang. She sent a third-round dead-center hit. Keating crouched beside her, peered through the spotting scope. Hold. Point 2 left, Sergeant. He checked the mirage, then her, and nodded. Correct. When she stood and cleared the rifle, there was no laughter from Harris. The other soldiers were watching her differently now. Not as the girl with the broom, but as someone who had just outshot Keating's standard drill. Keating's only comment was, "Not bad, Bennett. Not bad at all." Julia picked up the broom without a word and returned to sweeping. 2 days later, a joint training event brought a detachment from the 75th Ranger Regiment to Fort Claymore. The course was brutal. Targets from 400 to 1,000 yards, shifting winds, time transitions. Julia was assigned to brass duty again, but mid-morning, one of the Ranger spotters went down with heat exhaustion. Keating didn't hesitate. "Bennett, you're up." She slid in behind the spotting scope for Sergeant Whitaker. "Target 820-yard plate, right of the tree line," he said. She found it in the glass, noted the 600-yard flag snapping left to right, heavy mirage boiling above the dirt. "Hold point 6 left. Fishtail every few seconds, wait for the lull." Whitaker adjusted, breathed, fired. "Impact," Julia called. They moved through the course, her calls sharp, his hits consistent. By the 1,000-yard stage, Whitaker was grinning. "You've done this before," he muttered. "Once or twice," she replied. When they finished, Keating told her, "Spotter's log looks good. Clean calls all the way. You just helped post the highest score of the morning." The rest of that day, Julia stayed on the spotting scope for Whitaker through multiple iterations of the range. The Rangers were quick, aggressive, and confident, and they listened to her calls like they were coming from one of their own. By the time the training cycle wrapped, she had been behind the glass for almost 4 hours straight, her eye tired but her focus sharp. Whitaker gave her a quick handshake before loading his gear into the truck. "You ever think about doing this full-time?" he asked. Julia gave a small smile. "Not really my lane, Sergeant." He shook his head. "You're in the wrong lane, Bennett." That comment stayed with her through the week. Back in the barracks, sweeping and hauling sandbags, she found herself catching the wind changes in the corner of her eye, the twitch of a flag or the way the heat shimmer bent just a little differently. She would note it automatically, half-minute right, quarter left, without anyone asking. A week later, a storm front rolled over Fort Claymore. Low, heavy clouds pressed the air down, and a steady 20-mile-an-hour wind cut straight across the range. It was the kind of day that made most people stay indoors, but for the sniper section, it was a perfect opportunity to test skill in adverse conditions. Keating was setting up a small group for a crosswind challenge when his assigned spotter was called away to handle an urgent call from the armory. Without hesitation, he looked over at Julia. "You've got nothing better to do, Bennett," he said. "Get over here." She crossed the gravel quickly, taking the spotting scope as he moved aside. The wind carried the smell of wet earth and the faint metallic tang of rain. "Target at 900, Keating said. "Wind's pushing hard from right to left. Mirage is all over the place. Let's see if you can keep up." Julia took a moment to settle in. She focused on the target, then pulled back to watch the heat lines bend and curl. The wind wasn't steady. It surged and eased, each shift lasting only a second or two. She tracked the rhythm, the way her father had taught her on long summer afternoons when the prairie grass bent and straightened under invisible hands. "Hold 1.2 right," she called. "Shoot in the lull." Keating fired. The spotter plate at 900 rang faintly. They worked through the sequence, Julia adjusting her calls as the gusts changed. By the time they were done, Keating had run the entire rack clean, something no one else had managed in the last hour. When he stood, he gave her a short nod. "You're consistent." "I try, Sergeant." "You're better than most who've been doing this for years," he said, lowering his voice. "Don't waste it." 2 weeks later, Julia's unofficial role became something more public. A visiting Special Forces team had booked the long-range lanes for a 3-day qualification. Their lead sniper, Master Sergeant Cole, had a reputation for perfection and zero patience for error. On the first morning, his spotter suffered an eye strain and couldn't continue. Cole looked around for a replacement. Keating spoke up before Julia could fade into the background. "Bennett can do it." Cole's eyes swept over her, taking in the range gloves and the broom still in her hand. "She's maintenance." "She's the best wind reader you'll get today," Keating replied evenly. Julia was brought forward, handed a data card, and told the target array. The distances ranged from 500 to 1,200 yards, each shot timed. The wind was fickle again, shifting between gusts and brief calms. She watched the flags, the mirage, even the dust trails off earlier impacts. 7/10 right, half a degree up, she said for the 1,000-yard plate. Cole adjusted, fired, and the steel answered with a deep clang. They moved fast, each shot called without hesitation, and by the end of the run, Cole's grouping was the tightest of the day. He stepped back, studying her. "Who taught you?" "My father, sir, Richard Bennett." Cole's eyes narrowed slightly in recognition. "Bennett? Fett class circuit, early 2000s?" "Yes, sir." He gave a small nod, as if that explained everything. Julia didn't talk much about her father, but that night she found herself replaying those old range days in her head. She remembered lying prone beside him on the dusty grass, the heat shimmering over the Kansas fields. He'd hand her the binoculars and ask her to watch for trace, to tell him where the vapor trail bent in the wind. "It's like reading a story," he'd say. "The bullet's telling you where it wants to go. You just have to listen before it leaves." They'd spend hours like that, barely talking, the only sound the muted crack of the rifle and the distant metallic thump of steel. It was patient work, the kind she loved. By the third day of the Special Forces visit, Julia was no longer a curiosity. Cole had her on the spotting scope for every stage, and more than one operator asked her for a quick wind call before taking their turn. Even the base commander, Colonel Hayes, stopped by and watched quietly for several minutes before walking away without a word. The following week brought the annual base marksmanship competition. It was open to all qualified shooters, with categories for rifle, pistol, and combined arms. Julia didn't plan to enter. She wasn't officially in a shooting billet, but Keating handed her a registration form. "You're shooting," he said simply. The competition drew everyone from infantry platoons to admin clerks who spent more time with a keyboard than a weapon. The long-range portion was the most demanding. 10 shots each at 600, 800, and 1,000 yards, with wind calls made by the shooter alone. Julia's hands were steady as she set up at the 600-yard line. The first shot broke clean, the steel plate ringing clearly. She fell into a rhythm, adjusting instinctively for wind shifts. At 800 yards, she watched the mirage dance and held 3/4 left for a gust that never fully stopped. At a 1,000, she trusted the flags over the feel of the wind on her face, and every shot landed within the plate's inner circle. When the scores were posted, her name sat at the top of the board for the long-range category. Harris stared at it for a long time before muttering, "Guess the Broom girls got skills." The final change came a month later, during a joint exercise with an Allied unit. The scenario involved a simulated hostage rescue in mountainous terrain, with sniper teams providing overwatch. One of the Allied teams lost their spotter to a twisted ankle halfway through the insertion. The exercise was supposed to continue regardless, but Keating intercepted the controller and vouched for Julia. She was flown in with minimal gear, dropped on a ridge above the mock village. The terrain was tricky, uneven air currents rising from the valley, unpredictable gusts rolling over the peaks. She lay prone beside the shooter, scanning through the spotting scope, noting how the wind shifted with each passing cloud. "Half a mil left," she called for the first shot. "Wait for the lull after the gust." The shot broke, hitting the designated target clean. They worked methodically, every call timed to the subtle shifts she tracked in the environment. By the end of the exercise, the Allied commander sought her out personally to thank her. Back at Fort Claymore, Keating caught up with her near the rain shed. He held out a small, subdued patch, a simple circle with a reticle stitched in black thread. "It's not official," he said, "but it means you've got a place with us, whether the paperwork says so or not." Julia turned the patch over in her fingers, feeling the rough stitching. She thought about the hours spent sweeping brass, the countless small decisions to keep quiet when she could have spoken up, and the few moments she chose not to. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said. Keating gave a rare smile. "You earned it, Bennett, and one day when the time's right, you'll make it official." She pinned the patch inside her locker, hidden from view but known to her. And the next morning, when she picked up the broom and stepped onto the range, she knew she wasn't just maintenance anymore. She was part of something that couldn't be assigned by rank or duty title, earned only by skill, patience, and the quiet confidence to act when it mattered most. She picked up the broom anyway, because the wind didn't care about rank, and neither did the steel.